To the Irish, I mean, the victors go the spoils. The national championship is on the horizon. The playoff has been an unmitigated disaster. And the Iceman and Coach are back after a month. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's the Iceman, Matt Freites. Across from me is the coach, Brad Powell. It's been a minute, buddy. How you doing?
Iceman, doing well, sir. Doing well. Busy as always. Glad to be back here doing a little sports talk action. It's nice to hear the old Iceman and Coach intro to get things started. Obviously, really pumped that the Irish are in the national championship game,
As you should
and
be.
I'm slightly surprised that you maybe didn't have like several of the sound bites queued up of me saying this is not a national championship contender team.
You're not proven
When
wrong
things went
just
south.
yet. They have to win the game for you
Well,
to be proven wrong.
they're at least in contention. I mean, I guess you could argue that making the playoffs in contention, but they're in the game. They're in the national championship game, and maybe it was a little, the old INC reverse psychology I was trying to pull. I don't know.
To be fair, the team did not give you a lot of opportunity to feel confident about, I guess, their stature against the rest of what we thought was a very heavy cream of the crop in terms of college football. But as has been proven, I don't think that it really matters. And I feel like when we get to this game, when we start breaking down the playoff, we're going to talk about some philosophical elements of this new playoff that have really come to fruition that I think are going to be interesting for next season. But I want to start with something first. And I want to ask you, you said this was going to be the greatest college football season of all time. Did it live up to those expectations, or is that based off of purely the results of the national championship game now?
Oh, I mean, the results of the national championship game have no bearing on, I think, the quality of the season. I think that it's really tough to say that this has been the greatest college football season on record. I don't know if I can definitively make that claim, but it has been outstanding. I think that the 12-team playoff has added a whole new element of excitement. It kept so many fan bases and teams interested and participating in relevant football longer. And no, we didn't get a lot of I don't think we've had a ton of drama in the playoff necessarily that people might have hoped for, but things have been for them. I mean, other than I guess, none of the champions advancing, and we can talk about that later. But all in all, to get back to your question, I still think I don't know if I can definitively make the claim it's been the greatest season ever, but I do think that we are moving in the right direction. I'm happy with the 12-team playoff, and it's going to continue to make things more exciting.
I think the mistake that a lot of people make is that they assume that the first iteration of what we're going through is going to be the best and it's going to be perfect. And I think what we found out is that the 12-team playoff added intrigue at the end of the season that didn't exist in the same way, I think, with the 14 playoff and certainly before the playoff era at all. And it was nice to feel like these games that happened after Thanksgiving mattered. And especially the conference championship games, it felt a little bit like there was a little bit more stakes involved in those games. And I think also people are looking at the results and how this playoff has gone, more specifically the first round and the bye teams, and thinking, well, we got it all wrong. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you could take singular years of NFL playoff action and go back and look and think, wow, it was all chalk all the way through, or we got upsets all the way through. And one sample does not necessarily make an entire set. It does not tell you the entire story. And so I think that just because a Boise State didn't look the part against Penn State doesn't mean that in the future, a team like Boise State isn't going to look the part. I think this is just the way that the season progressed. And I do think that the playoff format is the right call. I think looking at this year, it may end up being expanded for one reason or another, but that's hopefully down the line. And I think that there was a lot of discussion that ended up being good for people like us, and I think obviously sports media. And at the end of the day, I do feel like the two best teams in terms of how they are playing in the playoff are in the national championship game. And isn't that what you want?
Yeah, I mean, you do ultimately want the two best teams to be playing for the championship, but also I think you could say that it's the two teams that have played the best for the last month.
Yes.
Because if we went back 2 months ago and you asked who are the two best teams in college football, like you may have gotten Ohio State, but I don't think Notre Dame would have been part of the answer for anyone.
Sure.
I would have got maybe Oregon, maybe Texas, Georgia, so other playoff teams. But as you mentioned, the drama that we got at the end of the season was great. All the interest and things from other teams like Boise State, Arizona State coming out of nowhere, being picked to finish last in the Big 12, then winning the the conference and making the playoff and taking Texas down to the wire. There was excitement there, and I was actually messaging a friend the other day about this. I said, if it weren't for the 12-team playoff, a good portion of the country wouldn't know who Marcus Freeman is still. A good portion of the country would have never heard of Cam Scattaboo from Arizona State and like the things that he did. We talked about there being, December and January legends born out of this 12-team playoff. And I think to some degree we've kind of gotten that, and it's been fun. And to see, these stories that are going from week to week, not quite week to week, but you get my point, round to round, and they're growing and growing, like the Marcus Freeman story and the Notre Dame story and things like that. It's been it's something we would not have gotten otherwise, and I think that's outstanding.
It is certainly a great byproduct. And like I said, stories, I think, make some of these sports. And I know that the results matter, but I think for people like us, having the extra stories that go along with it, some of the emotional stories that go along with it is a good element of it and certainly adds to it. But I think overall, the playoff is going to be just fine. It's just this year, there were a lot of teams that ended up making it that a lot of people felt maybe shouldn't be there. And I think that happens all the time. I mean, it happens in the NCAA tournament a lot. And I think you're going to see that going forward. But if we look at the entirety of the bracket as it existed, and we talked about, at least this is from the semifinal on here, and the first round games, I thought none of those were actually competitive. And a lot of people had things to say about Indiana, things to say about SMU, and whether teams like Alabama and Ole Miss should have been in there. But if bowl season has any bearing on any of this, Alabama should not have been in because they looked terrible against the Michigan team that, even though they beat Ohio State, at least wasn't as good as they have been. And Alabama wasn't exactly down some of their players. And so I think when you look at it this way and you look at these teams, and I think the teams that made it should have been in there. And I'm not sure necessarily that Notre Dame or Ohio State wouldn't have been where they are if those teams had been interchanged. Do you think that's fair?
Are you saying that if the teams had been interchanged, that would have changed the outcome we've had to this
No,
point? Is that
I
right?
don't think it would have, is
No,
my
I don't think
point.
so either. No, I agree. Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good point. I agree completely.
I don't
And
think it would have mattered at all.
no, I don't think so either. And those let's just look at the SEC for now. They have nobody to blame but themselves. Um, and it's unfortunate because there will probably be changes made. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but there will be changes made just because they didn't get what they wanted out of this. Um, had the SEC performed up to what has become the SEC standard, if you will, Arizona State and, well, I guess they're still conference champs, but Boise State or whoever, I just think it would have changed the dynamic of how the season progressed. Um, and I guess I guess truthfully, sorry, I keep going back and forth. The ACC's weakness is what opened the door for a Boise State to have a bye. Um, and the mediocrity of the Big 12 as a whole led to whoever came out of there was not going to be probably bye worthy, but that's what the format provides in this case. And then when we talk about the SEC, well, there was there's no SEC team left standing at this point in time. Um, Tennessee was dispatched in the first round by Ohio State. Notre Dame got rid of Georgia, and then you have, of course, Ohio State beating Texas in the semifinal the other night. And here we are with a Big Ten team that didn't even play in their conference championship game, and Notre Dame, who lost to Northern Illinois, as everyone likes to keep pointing out. Um, and again, like I said, it's not about. And I get people that are the old heads that like the old AP model or whatever, where it's just like essentially it demands perfection. And under those circumstances, Oregon would have likely been the national champion, right? By the old way, where it's just whoever was ranked number one in the AP at the end of the year wins. But that's just not realistic. I don't think that's a great way to crown a champion. I
No.
think you want to see the best teams play each other and see who can survive, and that's what we get now, even more with the 12-team playoff. And so it's who can be the best for this month long stretch. And no, Notre Dame and Ohio State have been it.
But you can make the argument that the same thing sort of exists in the NFL because it's about
Oh
getting
yeah,
in. And we've seen teams get in that were like, man, that team has no chance. And then the New York Giants pull off a miraculous run to the Super Bowl or, any type of, they don't even necessarily have to win the Super Bowl, but Carolina Panthers make a run. The Arizona Cardinals with Kurt Warner. Like there's so many teams that have come out of nowhere to make the Super Bowl when all of us, people like us, gave them absolutely zero chance. And that's, in my opinion, what the playoff is all about, is giving teams a chance. And you can make the argument that the way the national championship game has played out, that those teams got a chance. Because if it were any other year, Ohio State and Notre Dame would not be playing for the national championship, period. And so while you can say that, well, these teams made it and the playoff field wasn't that great, the playoff kind of worked the way that it was supposed to.
Yeah, it did. And I think the fact that you don't have what would have been the top, you don't have a representative from what would have been the top four in the old 14 playoff model in the championship game is exactly why we need to have this expanded 12-team playoff, like you're saying. 100% agree with that.
And the other element of this is all about making money. And certainly eyeballs were on these games, I would think, because you had great matchups, especially that Final Four. No matter what combination of teams that made it, it was going to be a quote unquote classic college football matchup. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas, all of those are some kind of brand. You could make the argument that Penn State might be the lowest of those brands, but I think you understand my point.
Yeah.
Is that these are recognizable brands in college football, and casual fans will probably show up to watch either of these. What college football ended up getting, arguably, is the best matchup of the four teams that were left, because these are the two most polarizing teams in the entire nation, bar none. I don't think there's any other team close.
No, you're right. And what's funny is there's a solid percentage of the population, I'm sure, who will wishes that both these teams could lose this game. You know what I mean? And there's zero people that wishes that there was a way both could win it. And that's great though, because people are still going to tune in. And I saw a ranking of like when the semifinals were set, a ranking of, okay, like from a ratings perspective or whatever, or an eyeballs perspective, how would you rank the potential championship game matchups? And yeah, of course, Ohio State and Notre Dame was the number one ranked matchup you could get, followed by Ohio State and Texas. And then I believe maybe it was Texas, Penn State, and then Ohio State, Penn State, I think was the last one. But
Yeah.
and yeah, who wanted to see that? You know, who wanted to see a rematch of the Big Ten, or not even that, just a rematch of a game that was played earlier this season? So I guess we got that in Ohio State, Oregon, but there's not a lot of excitement around Penn State. They're very above average. They're very good. They're very good. They just can't get over the hump to become great. And I think that James Franklin catches a lot of crap for not being able to win a big game, but the fact that he's doing enough to get them into these big games consistently. And now, yes, of course, he's gonna have to find a way to get over the hump, but they shouldn't. I tend to think, and this is the total opposite of how sports operate these days, because everyone's so impatient and emotional. But Penn State should take like the Steelers' Mike Tomlin approach with James Franklin, and not the Bears' Lovie Smith approach when it comes to his future at Penn State. I don't think he's anywhere close to the hot seat, but I think that even if next season goes exactly like this season went, I think you're going to start hearing some rumblings that because people are going to want more. And when there are dozens of programs around the country that would take James Franklin in a second and take the success that he's had at Penn State.
They would, for sure. But I think this playoff uncovered a few things for me. First thing, and you've said this since the beginning of the season, is that we're going to get January, essentially heroes or stars or whatever you want to call it. And that there were going to be narratives that were going to be crafted or changed depending on how this playoff has gone. And I think if you look at the two coaches that are here, Marcus Freeman and Ryan Day both have gone through, I would say, some ups and downs in terms of the narrative around their coaching for different reasons. Ryan Day, we fired him twice on this show, and he has been fired many times all along the way. I still stand by that losing to that Michigan team is a bad look. And I think that he needed to win the national championship. He has the opportunity to do that. Marcus Freeman, I honestly don't think that Marcus Freeman has to win the national championship to now be validated as the head coach at Notre Dame. I think that this run up until this point does a lot and provides a lot of goodwill for him to be seen as legitimate as the head coach of Notre Dame. And so I think we saw that, and this game is going to be interesting in who brings it home. What do we say about Ryan Day after this? What do we say about Marcus Freeman after this? And the playoff provided that. And on the other side of that, James Franklin got the opportunity to shake off a little bit of that, and he really couldn't. And what we said came true. No matter how he does in the first two games, if he doesn't make the national championship, we're still going to say that he can't win a big game. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And so his narrative stays the same. And so there is opportunity that came about by this, and you're 100% right, and it came true. So you are the prognosticator of prognosticators.
I don't know about that, but I don't hear any trumpets playing either, so no prognosticating today. But yeah, I think that Marcus Freeman's validation came in the win over Georgia. I think at that point in time, he really got the credit that he deserves nationally after that win, and then he just solidified it with the win over Penn State, and it's just the nature that those two wins took place. And I think it's funny because the narrative went from before the Georgia game. The narrative about that matchup was that there was a huge coaching advantage for Georgia. And now the narrative is how good of a coach and an in-game coach Marcus Freeman is. You know what I mean? And a leader of men and all these things that come along with it. And he deserves every bit of it. And even you hear Paul Feinbaum say that Marcus Freeman has made Notre Dame likable and for the
I
average
agree.
person. And it's true because he's just a genuine guy. He is the antithesis of Brian Kelly in
In
every
every
sense
way.
of the word. Yeah.
Yes.
And the guy is if he could, when they ask him questions about himself and his success, if he could just run away, he would, because like he has no interest in talking about his personal success or anything that comes along with it, because I think that I don't think it's even like a show. I think he's just genuinely invested in team success. And I think he preaches that to his players as well, that hey, if you do the things you have to do for us to achieve team success, individual success will be a byproduct of that, and you will get your recognition or whatever it is you're looking for. But if we're focused on team success, it all takes care of itself. So it's really great to see that. And talking about Ryan Day, and we fired him twice, as you said. And I think I was like pretty well set on that. Once he lost to Michigan, you got to win the national championship. And as I was sitting there watching the Texas game the other night, I was asking myself, I'm like, okay, so if he loses this game, do I think that he should be fired? And I was like, no, I don't, though, because I thought that they had played so well against Tennessee and Oregon. And that I thought that just not just winning those games, but the way they won those games, I think kind of saved his job. Because I think that if they would have dropped that game the other night, I think he would have been fine. I don't think there's any. I think had they lost to Tennessee, or got the doors blown off of them by Oregon, different story. Um, but I think that he's done what he had to do to keep his job, and I think it's kind of nice for him because he probably does feel like that monkey's off his back a little bit, as far as like, okay, I have to prove that I'm the guy here, and he can just coach this national title game without that. I don't know. He probably feels pressure. Who am I kidding? But like, I think that I at least don't think his job's on the line.
I don't think his job is on the line, but I do think the court of public opinion is still out on him. And I think more specifically in Columbus, because there is an expectation that you win national championships. Getting there is not the prize. I know I just said a little bit earlier that Marcus Freeman has bought himself some credibility by making this game, but that credibility doesn't last very long. He's going to have to bring it home, right, to really solidify him, or else he gets put in the Brian Kelly category of guys that were good enough couldn't take it home, because Notre Dame hasn't won a championship now. We're getting close to 40 years. Somebody's got to bring it home. And so while Ryan Day, I think, has saved his job and is certainly worthy of saving his job, and I should be upfront that I do not like Ryan Day. I haven't from day one.
Not
He
many
rubs me the
people
wrong
do.
way. No, but I can recognize that, yeah, he saved his job by the way that this team looked. And if he wins the national championship, then all bets are off. He's an Ohio State legend in terms of coaching, and it is what it is. But if he loses this game to Notre Dame, while I think he gets a little bit of a pass, I do think the fan base is still going to be feeling a certain way and percolating about him, because his two predecessors brought it home. So he has to bring it home, in my opinion.
I'll say this though, I feel a little bit like Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame to some degree are playing with house money. Like, and I mean
They
that
are.
like they've established that they're for real. I don't think that anyone thinks they're going anywhere. You know, like there's no reason to believe that they're not going to sustain this type of success because of the recruiting they've had. Obviously, there is a chance of some coaches getting poached away. The fortunate thing for them is both of their coordinators are on the, they're on the older side of the spectrum a little bit. And, I don't know that either of them have a strong desire to be like a college head coach. Now, perhaps maybe, in Al Golden's case, if an NFL team comes calling to be the D coordinator or something, maybe he would take that job. I mean, there is something to be said for not having to go recruiting. But I think they have a better chance of keeping their staff intact than maybe other programs that would find themselves in a similar situation, just because of they don't have that new shiny young offensive genius that's going to get poached for the next head coaching job or something along those lines. So if they, no reason to believe they can't sustain the success and be back here. And this is, you talk about just a step forward. This is like 4 steps forward, right, over last season. So um you'd love to win the game. I hope they win the game. It would be great. Like you said, first time since 1988 that would have happened. And it would be a program changing, in every sense of the word, program changing victory that could really propel them to, who knows, a decade of success under Marcus Freeman, maybe a new Notre Dame dynasty.
Very true. Before we prognosticate about the future, I want to go back to the playoff at large. And the other talking point that has been circling the wagons is the format, the buys more specifically. And we kind of touched on this when we started seeing the first rankings come out, the first projected bracket. And we talked about how there could be some interesting byproducts of the way that this has been set up. And now that we've seen it for the first time, I will be very curious if there are tweaks in this offseason. I know that it needs some time to get perfected, but I wonder if there are going to be overcorrections to how this is working, because getting a bye in football, objectively, right, away from everything that is college football, is a good thing, because football is a very violent sport. It's very tough. You get so many little bumps, bruises, nicks along the way that guys could use that extra week of rest. But in this case, the bye makes it so long between games for the teams that actually got a bye. Football is also a game of rhythm. And so when you have extended time off, it's very difficult to mimic game speed. And teams that got to play in the first weekend got to get back in that rhythm a little bit. They got to get a little bit of that confidence back and feel a certain way, right? Not every team feels it gets that benefit, because obviously Tennessee didn't look that good, and a lot of it comes down to preparation, coaching, and certain things. But when you go to the next week and you see all the bye teams, basically, except for Arizona State, look like shit, like unprepared, not ready to go. And it's going to bring up some interesting, do I want to win my conference talk? I think you do from a money perspective, but I will be interested to see how all of that works out, because maybe it's not the best thing at this level to get a bye when there is such a long period of time. And to me, it also brings up the idea of, well, if you want to have these games on January 1st, which New Year's Day has been college football's forever, then I think something either needs to happen. They need to extend the season longer, more regular season, or they need to push back the start of the regular season so that there is a little bit more time, less time between the conference championship game and when those bye teams get to play, or I'm just totally full of shit. One of the two.
Honestly, I think what you do is you just expand the 16. Expand the 16 so there's no buys. That puts everybody on a level playing field. Top 5 ranked conference champions get an auto berth, but not it has no bearing on their seeding at all whatsoever,
Yeah.
just like the NCAA tournament. And you put, the next, if one of those teams is outside the top 16, obviously they'd be seeded 16, and you plug everybody else in where they are in the final ranking, and you go from there and you play ball. I'd like to see him play round 1 and 2 on site, on campus, because I think that really,
1,000%.
like, give make having a high seed more valuable. You know what I mean? And so having a high seed would guarantee maybe your first 2 rounds you're at home, which could be extremely valuable for these, some of these teams. So that's, I think, how you maybe like kind of, okay, we're gonna expand to 16, we're gonna do this, but like highest, whoever the highest seeded team is will host in round one and round two. I understand though you have the Bulls and then the New Year's Six Bulls, and it is a nice pretty number when you can have the four quarterfinals and the two semifinals, and that fulfills your New Year's Six and so on and so forth. And it's just purely a money making venture. It's so funny that there's like a CEO or something of like a CEO of the Sugar Bowl. I'm like, who are these
You
people?
know,
Like,
I
it's
need
just
that job.
bizarre. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, how much money does this guy make? And he probably doesn't do anything. Um,
No, he doesn't.
it's
And
hilarious.
I think the point that you make up. So the reason I bring this up is because I do think there's a fundamental difference, even still, between professional football and what is considered semi-professional at this point. And I do think that the talent disparity, top to bottom, for these rosters makes the extended time off exacerbated a little bit. Because I think in the NFL, the good teams, I mean, we've seen it in the NFL too, where you get a bye and then they come out looking flat. A lot of it depends on a lot of different factors, team makeup, coaching, things like that. But I do think that professionals can handle the extended time off a lot better because they're seasoned. They've been through this for the most part. Whereas you got these amateur kids, yes, highly talented, don't get me wrong, but they are younger. The extended time off, figuring out a way to stay active, figuring out a way to stay hungry, those things I think are not, they're not learned skills at the level that professionals have learned them to date. And so I think that when you say the get rid of the automatic buys, I think that that makes a lot of sense. Have these teams play from day one. Can you imagine if in basketball the number one and number two seeds got buys, or the top four seeds in every region got buys or something? Like, how would they look when they had to play a team that just came off, let's say, a buzzer beater or something like that? Would they have the same energy? I don't know. And they're two different sports. I get it, but I'll be interested to see how it progresses. I think we get to a 16 team playoff faster than people realize.
I think so too, and I do think there'll be tweaks to the buys if they do stick with 12, or even if they go to 14 or whatever. I think that there will certainly be some adjustments. Um, it'll be, we like you said, we it's a rhythm game, and the Colts for years struggled because a lot of times they would have they'd have the home field advantage or whatever locked up, like, with 2 weeks to go in the regular season, and so they'd start sitting guys and not playing them and so on and so forth. So by the time they played in the second round of the playoffs, you'd have some of these dudes that hadn't played meaningful football in almost a month. Um, and that's yeah, you might be well rested, but you're certainly not in rhythm. And so I think that there's something to be said for that. We see teams all the time that go on these runs, like you mentioned at the top of the show, from the wild card spot or whatever, because they're playing their best football at the right time of year. And that's also what's exciting about letting, um, 12 teams in, is you're going to have these teams that are playing their best at the right time and go on a little bit of a run. I mean, Arizona State was real close to being that team. You could make an argument, at least based off of seeding, that Notre Dame's kind of like, and really they've done this historically under Marcus Freeman, where like they really have like ascended through the season. Like, by the end of the year, they are playing their best football. Like the way they finished last season, and they went into, granted because of some of the games they lost, it was like the Sun Bowl, and it was a pretty depleted Oregon State team at that point in time. But Notre Dame was playing really good football at the end of last year, and he has them playing great football at the end of this year, and that's all that matters, right? And no one gives it. It makes the Northern Illinois thing, which is an inexcusable loss, but it doesn't matter. It didn't change anything. If anything, it helped Notre Dame. It benefited them tremendously. It refocused them, and they've made a point that, like, don't forget the pain. Remember the pain of that loss.
That's what the point I was about to bring up is both of these teams, now switching to the actual title game itself and sort of previewing it. Both of these teams share a loss that I think was the best thing that happened to them. They just happened to get them at different times of the year. I think if Notre Dame loses to a team like Northern Illinois later in the season, that really does hurt their profile because, as you know, even in college football today, the later you lose, the worse it is. And I think that won't change because it's almost like a what have you done for me lately thing. And so Notre Dame loses the second week of the season after a huge win against Texas A&M, and then they ascend throughout the rest of the season, to your point. And I think that that was very motivating. Ohio State is a team that had so much pressure on them, and we put it on them too. They lose to their rival. There's so many things that about that game, the brawls at the end, the way that the game was coached, the game planning. And a lot of people were talking about the fact that Ohio State better look good against Tennessee, and they have come out and look motivated. They have looked like a different team that played Michigan, and that's, I think, why they are where they are. And I think that is a valid point, and I think that the Northern Illinois thing, you can continue to bring that up. If Notre Dame wins the national championship, the Northern Illinois loss does not invalidate their national championship whatsoever.
You're right. If they had lost to NIU at the end of the season, that would it would have totally different. They could have the same exact record, beat the same exact teams with the same exact rankings. But if you swap that Army and NIU game, you play Army week 2 and NIU there at the end of the season, totally different perspective.
I also think that like I was thinking about this too because I saw a graphic that Budge posted about the records of all the coaches in the playoff and their records in the playoff and how we need to rethink our narratives around these coaches. And I think Ryan Day, for instance, losing to Michigan is tough, but it was how they responded. And I think losing to Michigan doesn't invalidate their national championship because they played through this playoff, which every other team had to do. It just sucks because you don't get bragging rights every year because you want to beat your rival. But it wouldn't matter. Like, I think there are people who are still trying to say that if Notre Dame wins a national championship, to me, not me personally, but to them, that it's invalid because they lost Northern Illinois. And I just want to say to those people, like, tell me you don't know anything about playing football because that's ridiculous. Like, you play games, you lose. Like, if Alabama won the national championship, would it be invalid because they lost 3 games? No, nobody would invalidate that. They'd say, look at Alabama. They came and rose up and won the national championship. But with these teams, we're not going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I should say that I'm not a Notre Dame sympathizer in any way. Like, I'm apathetic to them now. I used to hate them. Now I'm apathetic to them. Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. You're welcome. No, you're right. And we see it all the time, though. Like, no one, as you may remember, other than the 72 Dolphins, no one has gone undefeated in the NFL wire to wire, right? Even the mighty New England Patriots found a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory against the New York Giants. And so nobody, even in the NFL, man, it's only happened once ever the team goes undefeated. And those are the best in the world, right? At playing this game. And they still perfection is so hard to achieve. And to give to sit there and expect perfection out of college kids who have lives, and just think about how hard your day-to-day life is. I understand, yeah, whatever, they're getting paid and so on and so forth, and they're treated like rock stars, but they're still human beings and deal with the day-to-day emotions that come along with just going through life in general, and not to mention the pressure and criticism that comes along with being in the spotlight like they are and having to manage that. Most people are not equipped to handle that sort of thing, especially at that age. And to sit there and demand perfection from them is kind of ridiculous when you really think about it. And it's impressive, though. I mean, I think the most impressive things about these two teams, most impressive thing, is they both overcame really bad loss, devastating losses, more so devastating for Ohio State because it was their rival and they haven't beat them in 4 years or whatever the case. And Michigan was down this year. Devastating for Notre Dame because it was a MAC school, a middle of the pack MAC school, that beat them. And so 2 really bad losses, but you had young men and teams that came together and they overcame adversity. And here they are at the end of the year, last 2 standing with a chance to win a national championship.
Yeah, it's going to be a good game regardless, which means it's going to be a blowout now either way. But my point is I think it should be a good football game. I think the stories are going to be good. And again, you have a likable coach and a non-likable coach. And I think that, I'll be interested to see what the numbers are of the viewership of this game because you have such polarizing teams. Either nobody's going to watch or everybody's going to watch because you're watching to watch one of these two teams lose and feel good about it. And it's just I like this. I don't know. I like this matchup based off of everything that we saw. Like, it would have been cool if we saw, an Arizona State make a run or whatever. But we get these two schools that just have baggage that comes with them, and who's going to emerge on top is what we're going to find out. And we'll break that down after the game. We got a little bit of time before then. It's January 20th, so by the time that game rolls around, hopefully we'll have another episode. But before we wrap this up because I know we're doing sort of an ad hoc episode here, but I want to talk about you talked about young men and NIL, and you had sent me something about Mick Cronin, who I believe is the head coach of UCLA. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yes,
basketball, right?
basketball coach. Yes, and he had a lot to say recently. I don't have the clip here about the players that he is coaching, and essentially he kind of was throwing the players under the bus for how they carry themselves from NIL. I think you can probably eloquently describe it better than I could.
Oh man, I don't recall like the finer details, but essentially he was just saying that uh, they have this. There's just this overwhelming sense of entitlement that's coming along with this NIL stuff, where they're in some cases uncoachable. They're completely uncoachable because they think that they've made it, they've arrived, they don't have to give effort, so on and so forth. And and we've heard this, right? We've heard rumblings of this all around, kind of the college landscape, both specifically in basketball and football. Even Jim Larinaga, when he left Miami, I think he I don't know if he made the mention when he quit or maybe it was a couple years ago. They went to the Final Four, and then like literally as soon as the season was over, like seven guys entered the transfer portal,
Yes.
and stuff. And it's I saw a little thing the other day, and I'm going to butcher it somewhat, but that's okay. That's just my style. Wide receiver from Texas Tech who had like 8 receptions on the season, entered the portal with a list of demands from any of his suitors, and it was like $700,000 cash up front, 3 vehicles for his family, all all expenses paid, travel and tickets to his family to come to all the games.
Wow.
He wanted a personal driver for himself for the duration of time that he was on campus, and this was like I said he had 8 receptions at Texas Tech. And this was his list of demands that he wanted. It's absolutely crazy. And we talked before the show about a situation in your personal life, and we mentioned overcorrection. This is NIL was an overcorrection. And do I think that these guys need to be getting paid something, especially considering that these universities are making money hand over fist because of the work and things they are doing? Yes, I do. Revenue sharing is probably really the right answer, somewhere here down the line. But right now, it's just the Wild West, man. There are no rules, and it's just wide open. And I think it's given us parity to some degree because we have better players playing at other schools other than sitting on the depth chart at an Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State, because they know they can transfer to one of those big schools eventually if they want to, go take some money and play. But it's incredibly fascinating. And we talked. I don't know if we talked about it, and I can't remember the kid's name. The kid from that had committed to LSU to play quarterback, and Dave Portnoy, and then the wife of a big time CEO who's a Michigan alum. Like the two of them get together, pay the kid $10 million to come to Michigan. Kid's never played a college football snap in his life, getting $10 million. It's absolutely insane. I mean, it just shows how I mean, one, how much people want their college football team to win, how much it matters to them, which is crazy, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm passionate about Notre Dame, but like absolutely crazy. And then just how misguided it is if you think about it. Like the NFL, most of these NFL franchises, I mean, they all are businesses, but there are some of them that do a much better job of operating as a business than others.
Yep.
And they have salary caps and they make smart decisions. And then you have some of these boosters at these colleges or whatever. They're just writing blank checks to some of these guys. They do not care. All they care about it's like micro versus macro, right? In the NFL level, it's more of a macro picture. They're looking at sustained success and most importantly, sustained revenue for the franchise over time and building a successful franchise where like these guys are looking at on a micro level. It's just like win now. Let's spend as much money as we have to, as much money as we can to win right now. To hell with whatever happens after that. And at some point it'll correct itself if there aren't restrictions and things put in place. And it'll be really interesting to see how long it takes before that starts to happen. Because you're going to have plenty of these guys that write these big checks to a kid that doesn't pan out, and you're only going to do that so many times before you start, maybe having some reservations. But I I got to imagine though, it's so hard to coach these guys because someone else will pay them. If they are a giant pain in the ass, they'll just hop in the portal and someone else will pay them. And that's one thing that's really great about Notre Dame, since we talked about them. They're the only team in the playoff that hasn't had a player enter the portal um, in the postseason. And like, and it's because, I mean, I'll just say it: Notre Dame recruits a different type of player, and they see the value in the education that Notre Dame provides. And it's not just strictly football and making as much money as I can right now. Fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, most of the people that have that sort of mindset usually get themselves weeded out or weed themselves out during the recruiting process. As that happened, like Deuce Knight, number one quarterback recruiter, a high quarterback recruit, was committed to Notre Dame. All of a sudden, pulled the plug to go take the bag and go to Auburn. And there's rumors that even he may get out of that deal and go elsewhere. But yeah, it's I cannot imagine why these guys would want to coach college football under these circumstances. And I think that's why you've seen like the Nick Sabans that just get out of the way.
I think the element of this that people sometimes don't bring up is they think, well, these kids deserve to get paid. And at a general level, I do agree with this because, as we've talked about and you just said, I do feel like these universities are making so much money off of these kids, more so in football, but basketball also, that the players deserve to get something in return. But this has been so unregulated in a way that has caused this sort of turmoil where, yes, fundamentally, depth of a lot of these teams has taken a hit because players are not willing to just sit. When you look at, let's take Alabama, for example, and you look at the list of running backs, the list of wide receivers, and you think there's no way all of those guys stay on the same roster for 3 years. It just doesn't happen in today's NIL world. But on the other side of that, while the players are getting compensated for their name, image, and likeness, my big fundamental gripe is, why can't they be held accountable for what they are receiving? Like, that's the accountability part that's lacking in this. Mick Cronin is getting crushed because people say, you can't do that. You can't say that about players. They're going to leave, all of this. And while that is true, why can't the coaches say something that is generally understood at this point, that we're paying these kids and they're not producing? If I don't produce as a coach, I get fired, right? And why do the kids not have to produce and get to just do whatever they want? And the coaches are supposed to stay silent about it. This is where I think they're going to have to figure out how to make this a way that it's sort of regulated so that these coaches can feel comfortable coaching. I'm not talking about being an asshole. I'm talking about coaching your kids.
Yeah, you don't hold them accountable.
Yes. Like, they're there to do a job, right? You're getting paid. If you and I go to our job and we say, well, you're paying me, so like, here's my list of demands and all this stuff. They're like, you're fired. Like, you're gone because you're not producing.
Right.
And so why is that accountability also not applicable to these kids? And that's where I think is the interesting talking point. And Mick Cronin doing it in a public way. I know a lot of people say you shouldn't do it publicly, but where else is he supposed to do it? Because it's clearly not working behind closed doors.
It was I saw it on X this morning, I think. And for some reason, I feel like I want to say it was the Texas basketball coach.
Could have been Shaka Smart.
Or was. He's at Marquette, right?
I don't know. I remember who.
I think he's at Marquette. He's at Marquette. Now, he was at Texas.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is. I know.
But anyways,
I can't remember his name, but I know who you're talking.
He was in the press conference, and he basically made the comment of like, there was a player that had a wide open shot and passed up the shot. And I don't know if this was on X or it might have even been our little Bradley chat that's on there. But he said he told the player, he's like, listen, like, do what you're paid to do. Shoot the ball.
Yeah.
That's what you're paid to do here. Like, I mean, he said that in the press conference, and that's what he told the kid. Like, and I mean, even like last year, to go down the Bradley road for a moment, last year, Bradley was struggling for a while. Post game, coach gets on there and says, basically it says the same thing. Like, these guys want to, they're getting paid to do something at a certain level, and they're not doing it right now.
Yeah. And that it's a job at this point. You're getting paid for your name, image, and likeness. And that's the thing, is it's name, image, and likeness, but it's like not tied to your performance. It's only about how your name, image, and likeness is used. And that's why it's interesting about how much money you're getting paid for your likeness when there's no performance ties. Like, I'll be interested to see how that goes, because
it's just buying players. That's literally what it is. Like, the NIL thing is just you're just straight up buying players.
Does it get to a point though where no team can sustain any sort of relevancy because players are just jumping all over the place? I mean, Cam Ward, I jokingly said he opted out at halftime, but he played the first half of the Pop-Tart Bowl, had like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns and said, I'm good. And essentially opting out of the rest of the game. But where's the line? Like, where do we go? Where does this progress to? And if there is zero loyalty in this, doesn't the whole system crumble?
I think there will be a correction before it crumbles. Something will get
An
put in place.
overcorrection.
Well, yeah, perhaps an overcorrection, but there will be some structure that's brought to this eventually. It's going to be weird to see how we get there, but I was thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, what happens? Like, because there's always going to be someone that's willing to write the check, at least right now. And until you have the majority of programs that start to kind of almost band together and say, like, listen, like, we're going to, almost like a gentleman's agreement, like, hey, listen, like, we're going to quit writing these $10 million checks to these kids because it's ridiculous. But there's always going to be one person that's willing to do it, which is why that would never happen. There's always that one person that'll sell their soul for a natty. And that's it's I we were talking I was talking about with the guys I coach wrestling with yesterday. We were talking about this exact thing and just how bad these people want to win. And I'm like, the Texas A&M boosters, basically presented a check right at halftime to do the buyout to get Jimbo fired last year. And it's just nuts, man. Could you imagine, which I don't know, could you imagine if there wasn't a salary cap like in the NFL? I mean, I know there's not one in baseball. I don't think there's luxury tax, right? But
Yeah, there is.
Just how much different it might be.
I don't know if teams would treat it any differently, because I think when it comes down to super rich people spending their money, they're going to spend it however they would like. We'll see. I don't know what comes of this, but what I do know is that Mick Cronin does not sound like a guy who coaches California basketball. That's all.
No, he doesn't.
And nor does he look like it. So what I do know is that Mick Cronin will be fired before any changes to this system are made, and it'll be because he doesn't win enough. And it will, whether that's directly related to the players or what, I don't know. But Mick Cronin will be fired at some point because that's just the way that it goes. So national championship game, dude, January 20th. I don't think you'll see us until after that game, but hopefully you'll see us on Braves Talk, because the OG says he doesn't have anything positive to say, but he has something to say, and we're going to get his
Always
ass on
has
here.
Something to say.
Exactly, and talk about this. So anything before we close out?
No, man, just happy to be back here doing it. I got a little guest hopping in here.
Excellent.
Mr. Carver, man, say hi to everybody. Say hi. Yep, good job. All right.
Excellent.
No, super pumped, man. Excited that the Irish are in the national championship game. Pumped for the opportunity that they have to, I guess, prove some people wrong, right? And go out here and get the first national championship since 1988. At the very least, put on a good showing. And you can't get blown. If anybody does get blown out, it's going to be Notre Dame getting blown out by Ohio State, because they are so explosive. Yeah, you do. Ohio State's offense is so explosive that they can put up points in a hurry. And that's that comment's great. I think the key for Notre Dame is you can't let Ohio State start fast. You can't let them come out and jump on you early. It's got to be a lot like what that Texas game was the other night. And if they can manage to do that, yes, sir. No, we're not pressing one of those buttons, not right now. But if they can come out and kind of do what Texas did and muddy it up a little bit and keep it within a possession or so, I think they'll have a chance. I mean, and Ohio State has one of the best defenses in the country, so they're not going to be able to. This is not going to be a shootout. I don't think that's going to happen. It's going to look like the Notre Dame Penn State game or like the Texas Ohio State game did. And Notre Dame's going to have to force some turnovers and make a couple big plays, I think, to find a way to win.
Yep. And there you have it. Irish by 25. You can find us on social media. You can find us in podcast form, whatever it is. We're always happy to do it. We're going to be getting off of football here pretty soon as the NFL playoffs are on. The Super Bowl will be here before you know it. And then we're moving on to college basketball. We appreciate it, everybody's time. We hope you have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you next time. This is Iceman and Coach.